The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
At that time, Jesus came to Jericho and intended to pass through the town. Now a man there named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector and also a wealthy man, was seeking to see who Jesus was. But he could not see him because of the crowd, for he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed the sycamore tree in order to see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When he reached the place, Jesus looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down quickly, for today I must stay at your house." And he came down quickly and received him with joy. When they all saw this, they began to grumble, saying, "He has gone to stay at the house of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Behold, half of my possessions, Lord, I shall give to the poor. And if I have extorted anything from anyone, I shall repay it 4 times over." And Jesus said to him, "Today, salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a descendant of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save what was lost." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Please be seated.
Have you ever eaten with a tax collector? I see some heads nodding, just some heads. The rest, they're not moving. I have eaten with a tax collector. I had no choice. When we entered the seminary many years ago, many decades ago, we were 26 who entered. And that was the biggest number of entries to the seminary, 26. There were 3-year levels then. The first 2 ahead of us, the sum of those 2 was 25. They were 25 in 2-year levels. When we entered, we more than doubled the existing number. The entry to the seminary then was in the month of June, when classes would start. And so when we entered the seminary, after a few days, it was the town fiesta of that town where the seminary was. And so they invited the brothers. They were thinking of 25 brothers. What came to the feast was more than 50. That was the last time we got invited. I'm just joking. But a big number of vocations, historically, I'm repeating it historically, also turned out to be, later on, after a decade, the biggest number of ordinations, to the priesthood. We were also the big number when we got ordained. Slash 50% of that, with 50% mortality, that's the number of our batch in the priesthood. So I'm happy to tell you about that background. And thanks to the tax collector, by the way, who fed us all those years. People tend to put into a box certain types of people, maybe even professions, because of some kind of a prejudgment. And that is what we experience in today's gospel. In the experience of this tax collector, I knew she was also treated that way. People came to her for 3 reasons. 3. And those reasons can be put into 3 letter C's. The first C is for the connection. You know, we have, when you have a stature in society, you have so many connections. In anthropology, we call this social capital. You either have the social capital or you have the symbolic capital. Social capital is what you have in Facebook, for example. You have so many friends. You have so many connections. You can link to many people. That is social capital. That's one reason why people go to the tax collector, for the social capital. The other would be the symbolic capital. The profession itself, tax. Maybe you have problems with your own taxes. Maybe your friends have problems with their own taxes. And here comes the tax collector. That symbolic importance becomes the reason why people go to her, the first C, for the connections. The second C is quite obvious, for the collection. That's the second C, the material capital. Maybe not so much in terms of monetary wealth, but maybe because of the privileges and the gifts she bestows. We, for that matter, benefited from that kind of C, from that kind of collection, or from that kind of material capital. She was thinking, the lady tax collector who was our benefactor, she was thinking, I need to help because I received so many things. So she would help the church, people who would not be able to pay her back in return except to pray for her. So she helped. And not always monetarily, always in terms of food, always in terms of fruits that she would send to the seminary, in that sense of material support. That's the second C. So you have connections, you have collections, but the most important thing is what is being underlined to us in the gospel today, the third C. And what is that? Communion. This is what is often neglected in human relationships, because we always tend to think about the first C, connections, or the second C, collections. And we do not bother to look into a deeper sense of communion. When Zacchaeus, the tax collector, was up the tree to see Jesus, Jesus told him that he would stay in his house. The purpose is, of course, not the first two C's, not so much. Maybe because of the connections of Zacchaeus, not so much because of his wealth. But because Jesus meant to stay in his house. Come to think of it, this is the reason why people grumbled. Maybe because they already know about the two other C's. But they could not imagine that Jesus would strike communion with Zacchaeus. What do we do when we strike communion with another person? It means, at the very basic, recognizing the person for who she is, for who he is. It means a deep respect for the integrity of the person. It means treating the person like yourself. And so when Jesus tells Zacchaeus that he must stay in his house, Jesus accords Zacchaeus a deep respect. And Jesus treats Zacchaeus in the manner that any one of us would like to be treated. Not for our connections, not for our collections, but really to foment, to continue, and to make flourish a relationship of communion. All the other things that happened to Zacchaeus happened because of a deeper level of communion with Jesus. And in the words of Jesus, today salvation has come to this house. Attaining salvation, therefore, means surpassing our biases. It means surpassing the prejudgments that we have on ourselves even, or on others, mainly because of social connections, or mainly because of capitals in the social, symbolic, or material sense. Salvation happens at the level of communion. Today, we receive the Lord in Holy Communion, in the Eucharist. Today, Jesus tells us, Zacchaeus, I mean to stay in your house. Jesus comes to us. You don't have to prepare a feast. You don't have to worry 50 people will eat at your feast. All you have to do is to open your house, sit down at table with the Lord, and listen to Him, and foment your relationship with Him, so that the Lord can also tell us, today, salvation has come to this house.